All right, everybody, we're going to start. We're all here because we're curious about this journey. I'm Mike Rothman. Kind of the point of this, I figure everybody's got their own journey that they're taking. You know, some of you guys are intending on being hobbyists, but maybe are curious about what's beyond the hobby. Some people are maybe have published books. I'm curious. In the audience, how many of you guys have already published at least one book? All right, so almost everybody. All right, so almost certainly most of you have given some thought as to, well, what does it entail? You know, what is a working author? And then are there steps beyond that, you know, as an example, what to expect? A lot of times we don't know what we don't know. So the intent here isn't necessarily to say, this is the path everyone should take. You know, this is more about what are the paths, and then you make an assessment on which ones are interesting to you, because ultimately, most people aren't crazy enough to do some of the stuff that I do, but you know, you might be seeing some stuff that, you know, I do or others do that seem interesting and you hadn't thought of, and maybe you want to kind of push yourself beyond where you're currently at. So, you know, like I said, the journey begins kind of beyond where you're at now. So this is part of a long trip. There's a lot of misconceptions about what an author is. There's a lot of delusions of grandeur. I'm going to publish my book and I'm going to make $1 million. And that almost never happens, but sometimes it does. You know? There's the flip side where we got people who, it's like, oh, you're an author. I'm sorry. It's like, yeah. Because, you know, this is a hard business to make money at, you know, or to have it efficient. And you know, I'll talk about it, but, you know, a lot of working authors don't have, you know, they may be working authors, which basically means they maybe pay a lot of their bills with that, which is great, but it maybe doesn't pay all their bills. So they probably have a primary job as well. So, and this is true of even New York Times bestselling authors. A lot of people think, okay, you got New York Times bestseller, you're the millionaire, or you're the whatever. It's almost never the case. So we'll talk about that. I mean, the reality is it's a job like any other job. And, you know, the deeper into this journey you take, the more you treat it like a business. And we'll talk about all that kind of stuff. So, I'm going to cover, you know, kind of the piece parts along the journey. This is not going to be comprehensive. I'm going to actually go at a pretty fast pace to try to give enough time for people to ask questions, because I can only anticipate what are the things that I think are important to cover, but I'm not going to get it right. And there's probably going to be questions that you have that I don't have answers on these foils, but I probably have answers somewhere in my head, or at least I can point you in the right direction. So if you know, and some people maybe have, we're gonna save the questions to the end, but I'd suggest if you come up with a question, jot it down on your phone or notebook or whatever, save it, because, you know, if I don't cover it, you know, that's what the microphone is going to be at for the end of the presentation. So a hobbyist. Now, that's pretty much, you know, where everyone starts. If you're trying to break into being an author, you need people to read it. So what do you even do? How do you even get people to read it other than hand them, oh, here's my loose leaf notebook with a nice story? So there are some practical realities, and all of these you're going to see are building on each other. So I just realized I didn't introduce myself. So most people probably don't know me. So Mike Rothman. I've lost track of how many. I don't have like Kevin Anderson, hundreds of books, but I've got over 20 books published, many languages. I've hit some bestseller lists, and I'm doing fairly well. I'm doing it. And at the end of this presentation, I'll actually show you kind of like a day in the life, or actually a week in the life of what I do that's kind of along the author vein, and to give you an idea of what does my day involve. And you'll get at least some appreciation to some of the stuff that I deal with at what would admittedly be, kind of on the, further end of the journey. So, for hobbyists, if you're trying to get people to read your stuff, many of you are probably familiar with some of these portals, but I just kind of wanted to point out, there's ways to get your stuff read. Amazon has a portal. None of these cost anything. I believe, some of them maybe, they don't automatically give you you may have to wait for, an ID to get on some of these, maybe like iTunes or something. But ultimately, all of these things are available to you if you want to. Now, most indie authors certainly focus really only on Amazon. And admittedly, I mean, I've published wide, so I've published through many retail outlets. And even when I was doing that primarily, 80% of my sales were Amazon. So it's actually smart from an indie perspective. If you're looking at economy of time, focus on Amazon. That's really where many of the readers go. Certainly in the English-speaking world, I mean, if you're going to, Czechoslovakia or wherever, maybe things differ. But I can tell you right now, the majority of sales for books in German and in Spanish and French and English are through Amazon. So, and I can tell you in English is about 80%. The other piece is obviously you need a cover. So we're talking the basics here. So what do you need to get something that someone could potentially pay you a little bit of money for and read your stuff? That's how we all start. And so there is relatively inexpensive methods. Now, I've not used these particular ones, but I kind of asked the audience before, what have you guys used as, if you're looking for on the cheap, how do I get decent covers? These are some of the ones that were recommended. I'm not recommending them. Others have used them. And it gives you an idea of the price range you're talking about. And that's what I got off the website. So again, this is not necessarily me recommending. This is just, I know what others are using. And it gives you an idea of the investment. Obviously, the book itself is a time investment, but it's free to upload. And then you need something snazzy. Now, hypothetically, you could get away with nothing and just, put a simple bitmap with paintbrush and a title, and it won't probably look very nice, but you can do this fairly cheaply. Let's go to the working author, where probably a lot of you are either at or looking at getting there. So the reality is this is at the stage where you start realizing that this hobby, this thing that you were experimenting with, is actually making you some money. So you're actually seeing that you can actually pay some bills. Maybe it's the electric bill. Maybe it's the mortgage. Maybe, car payment. Whatever. All of that is great. Now, when you start realizing that, the first thought that came to my mind, I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I'm actually getting some money out of this. How do I get more? So you start treating it like a business. You're like, okay, this isn't a joke anymore. I'm starting to actually pay some bills. So I'm going to treat this like I'm exercising. How do I grow my muscles, so to speak? And we talked about how do I get it up on retail and how do I get it cover. But some of the topics that I'll talk about is you might have to get familiar with the thing that almost all authors despise is, what is this thing marketing about? So we'll talk a little bit about that. You might start working with editors because, a lot of people, when they first start out, like I read it through a couple times, it was good enough, and I sent it up. We all do that. We all eventually realize that's probably insufficient. So we start looking at the idea of getting an editor. Working with cover artists maybe the initial covers that I showed earlier are fine forever. That's a personal choice. But you may work with cover artists. Depending on your genre, some things may be harder and easier to work with. And I'll actually use some examples that I've gone through and some key learnings I've had. And you'll also realize that there's a focus that you need to actually, to get to, further, because this working author thing spans the I'm paying my electric bill to, I can do this full time, And so that's a pretty wide gap. So, there's going to be things where I talk about, what am I good at? It's like, where do you focus your time? Now that you're realizing you can bring more money in, you're like, well, what's selling better? These are things that you don't think about as a hobbyist. When you start working as a author, you start realizing, some of the stuff that I've written sells a lot better than some of the other stuff I've written. So we'll talk about that. All right, so I'm actually talking at a couple sessions this week, and one of them has to do with kind of an advanced marketing thing. Social media is not marketing, and I'll really emphasize this. One of the biggest mistakes people make, and I talk about this actually in the advanced session, is that, and it's so easy to do, and we all think it makes sense, but it's actually the opposite thing you want to do. We all, when we get our first book, we're proud. It's a newborn baby that we just birthed, and it's ready for the world to see. And we get Uncle Sal, or Aunt Sally, and my grandparents to buy it, and we get our friends to buy it, and that's all great. And those are your first purchases. Now, I won't go into details here because we don't have time, but I do go into details in the other sessions where I talk about ultimately it's not you selling it, it's Amazon selling it or whatever retail outlet. And they have algorithms that they use to figure out, okay, so this thriller that you just uploaded, I'm noticing this person who is a knitter, is buying this. A lot of knitting people. So I'm going to advertise this book to this knitting club. It's probably not the best place for the book to be advertised. So a lot of people really stumble on some of this marketing stuff because they make some very basic mistakes right up front. They're in essence teaching the retail outlet who the customer is by virtue of who's buying it. And if you have a whole bunch of people that with maybe different interests than yours or than the target book, you're teaching the retail outlet maybe the wrong message. So this is why I say don't use your social media as a way to sell. You want it to be a way for people to get in touch with you and interact. That's great. But it's really not the way I would say market, because maybe only after you have a following as an author. It's like people know me for science fiction or thrillers and stuff like that, and a lot of people who follow me, are readers as well, and so then it's maybe reasonable that it's like, hey, it would be malpractice for me not to mention that I've got a new book coming out. But when we're starting out, your audience probably isn't that. So it's your aunt and uncle and friends and whatever, and the people who don't read science fiction are suddenly buying the book because they're friends of yours, but maybe you've written a Western. It's going to set you back. So so these foils are all available for download off of the Eventi app. I have a lot more words here because I wanted to. I know people will look at this offline, and so I wanted to get a lot of messages. I'm obviously speaking off the cuff. So, marketing. So, again, it's a reality, and I'll tell you right now. A sneak peek at the end. All of the top authors all of them, without exclusion, have marketing budget. We all spend some amount of money, maybe a little, maybe a lot, on marketing. So it's a reality that it isn't crucial in the beginning, but the message I'm saying is that eventually you're going to have to bite that bullet and figure this out. It's not something that any of us necessarily enjoy, but kind of point you in the direction. I like what I said on the realistic goals. Marketing is like owning a boat. You can always put money into it and never get much back out of it. Marketing can be like a black hole. You can shove all sorts of money into the marketing hole and see no ROI. So this isn't something that you want to kind of like dive head first in. You want to figure it out. You want to experiment. You want to kind of just test the waters. And I'm not even saying this at the beginning of the whole working author journey. This is something that, figure it this way, especially initially, any marketing money you're spending is money you can afford to light on fire, because you may not get anything out of it. Hopefully that's never the case, because even if the marketing effort fails, you've hopefully learned what doesn't work. So, which is potentially useful information. The methods for marketing. So a lot of people will use AMS, and I actually use that a lot. AMS is Amazon's marketing service. They call it something else now, but it's the most effective, because the more distance there is between the reader and the place you purchase, the less you'll get drop off. So like imagine you have an ad on Facebook, which is also a reasonable place to have. But, and let's say that Facebook ad, you click on it and it sends you to your website. And let's say you can't buy it from the website, but your website gives you a place to click maybe at different retail spots. But I've actually done this experiment. You will run into, let's say you have 1,000 clicks on Facebook. So 1,000 clicks arrived at your homepage. And I've watched what's the outbound clicks. Who clicked on the retailer? It drops by 3x. So maybe only 300 actually ended up clicking. So they're like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm not, whatever. So what you want is a single action to land them on a place where they can go, okay, buy. The less clicks you have between you catching their attention and them actually buying is better. Facebook, I despise Facebook I'm currently in jail because I told a joke. Many of you are probably old enough to remember the commercial, my bologna has a first name, it's OSCAR. All right, so I have a little bit of a dark humor. I'm kind of dry humor. And so I made a statement because there's a show on Netflix currently of this name. So I was talking about Jeffrey Dahmer, and I made a single sentence observation that said, I suspect that Jeffrey Dahmer's bologna may have had a first name. I was in jail 30 days. I'm still in jail. So I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. So.
That's very broad, but on a serious note, though, is that you hate Facebook as an advertiser or as a human being, if that makes sense?
I hate it as a human being. Okay. Yeah. No. The reason I list it is because it's actually a very useful tool. And it's useful because, not that I'm trying to drive more ads to Facebook. We already know my relationship with Facebook. But if I wanted to advertise to a target audience that lived within 6 miles of Wimbledon Stadium, I can do that with Facebook. I mean, it's ridiculous how well set up their ad campaign system is once you learn it. So it's an excellent system, and they have really wide breadth. Like historically, I would use it a lot for international advertising, et cetera. So, it's useful, but if you find yourself to be outspoken and you find yourself in jail, you won't be able to use the ads while you're in jail. So, they cut themselves off. I who spend a lot of money, they're preventing me from spending money on their, yeah, don't get me started. TikTok is actually something that's, I have zero experience with it, but I know the target audience is generally younger. So it depends on what your genre is. If you have a younger audience, TikTok may be a very viable thing. I know a lot of people who use it very effectively. And there's always more, venues. And this is just an example of a Facebook dashboard where, I just have a whole bunch, in this case, I'm advertising to French targets and German targets and whatnot. So, it can get complicated, but, this is the stuff that, I just want to make you aware that it exists and people use it and you have a way to look into it.
Where's that from?
This one's a Facebook dashboard. Yeah, yeah. So the question is, do I do the ads or do I have a personal assistant? So I personally do them myself, but I know a lot of people have people who handle the marketing. And well, I won't talk too much about that, but that's an option. I do all of this, so so I'm ridiculous. Now, working with editors. Again, everyone works with editors, and the key takeaway I would want you to get is editors don't solve everything. They don't solve all of your problems. They will not make a bad story good. They will make a bad story more legible. That's not necessarily a selling point, but even a great book can ruin the experience for some people if you've got grammar mistakes or your wording is awkward. So, I mean, they're intended, depending on the type of editing you're getting, to help with that. Because we all do that. We all have the mistakes that we run into, and we need someone else to go through that. Working with, oops, I almost passed. So working with cover artists. Now, again, so personal experience. I started off, I didn't use those services. I actually started off freelancing with artists, and which wasn't a mistake, but the mistake I made was I thought I knew what I wanted on the cover. I'm not an artist. I don't have the sensibility of an artist, and I'm not the right person to be making calls on what goes on the cover. However, I can say, here's what the theme I want to be shown. I don't know, in my mind, what's eye-catching or what message I want to give on the cover. You're probably not the right person to make some of those calls. And I'll give you an example. So here's an example of, I shipped with this cover. And to be, completely fair, if you look at just the art is reasonable. There's nothing wrong with the art. Now, and in my mind, I was thinking, there's a couple scenes that I think are really key. I want to show the main characters. I want this other intense scene to be shown up. How do I get them both on the cover? I was directing the show here, which was a mistake. And this is what I ship now. And again, this is more a case of me taking a step back saying, this is not my talent. This is not where I should be making decisions. But I like, hey, this is the theme of the book. This is the, it's a technology thing. It's Darwin. It's a medical thriller. And I'll show you how this, how this process works with a different book. But this is what I ended up with. Obviously, I would say the majority of you would probably say the one on the right is a better cover, more eye-catching. I paid less for that cover. So, I mean, obviously I had to pay for both, but, and I probably had shipped with that for a good 9 months, a year before I was like, it doesn't look right. So working with an artist, so this is the same person, so this happens to be all photorealistic, art. In this case, I'll show you some actual drawn art as well. But you'll oftentimes work with an artist, and he'll give you some sketches, some ideas, some very preliminary layouts. So, and this is the kind of thing where he sent me back, well, is this the kind of thing you're looking at? And we would probably go back and forth. And, and eventually we landed on something like that. And then it got tweaked even further, so this is obviously the full layout spread, and that's just the front cover. And then we ended up with this. And again, it's an iterative process, but I let him run the show on the design. Yes? So in this case, so this is going to vary greatly, but I can say that the average book cover for these kind of things, you'll probably see about $500, give or take. And again, you'll start investing that potentially. You may find a particular artist who gives you stuff for $50 and be happy forever. So this is not necessarily a recommendation you have to spend a lot on a cover. This is there's differences, and there's people that make different choices. Now, obviously, there's some genres, especially fantasy, that lends itself less to photorealistic and much more. I can't see the time. To drawn art. So in this case, for a drawn art piece, I'll typically get some thumbnails written, and he'll mock up a couple of covers, and it's like, okay, I'll pick one, and then we'll iterate on this. It's like he'll hand draw kind of like the scene, and obviously it's still rough, but we kind of zoom in to the details and get closer. It's like, is this what you want? Is this the direction we want to go? I'll say yes or no, make changes, whatever. It's easy to do it at this stage. And then we'll eventually go ahead and get to the point where, okay, now that we've solidified the design, let me get some detail, the fine detail in. So he does that. Then he'll do the colorization, and then eventually you'll have the full cover. So it just gives you an idea of there's a process in this. And I'm not the one designing the trees and the layout and none of that. And then some genres actually have internal illustrations as well. So, so again, thumbnails, to start with. It's like, is this basically what you're looking for? Yes, no. And if no, he'll write more thumbnails, or she. And eventually you create, some high detail stuff. Now, I will point out so there's a reason I have these frames here. So on a print book, it doesn't matter because the pages are cream or white. But on an ebook, if you don't have the frames, what you end up looking, this is an aesthetic thing. If you have an internal graphic, I always put a frame around it because then it looks like I put it there on purpose. The frame is there to frame the picture. But without the frame, it looks like a copy-paste from Photoshop or something where you have this artificial white square out of, because if your background on the ebook reader is black, you're going to have this glaring white square with some art. It doesn't look good. So the frame, everything looks normal at that point. Now, your focus. Again, a lot of us think we're artists, whatever. We love our books. We love all our books. They're all great. At some point in time, we're going to realize we're not always, the things we love may not be the things that sell. And that's a decision point you may have at some point. Maybe you're okay with that. But what's your goal? And if your goal is to make more money, pushing harder on the things that don't sell may or may not make sense. So inevitably, this is just raw data. No judgments on genres or otherwise. But if we look at just kind of general information, and this is stuff that I've pulled in this public information, but just a general theme. Romance sells a lot. Oh, big surprise. mystery thriller, suspense. They sell a lot, science fiction, and on down. So if you're writing a education and teaching book, you're probably not going to sell a lot of books. It's just this is just what it breaks down to. I also got this next slide off of BookBub. Now, if you guys aren't familiar with BookBub, it's probably the biggest mailing list in the world, and this kind of gives you an idea of, from their mailing list, when they advertise to a mailing list, like crime fiction, on average sells 3,000 copies. The number doesn't matter. It's like, what's the relative number? So crime fiction clearly sells, 3,000. Relative to, let's say, science fiction, sells 1,800. So theoretically, if you're going to write crime fiction, it'll probably sell more on the average than science fiction. Or at least that's the implication. Humor may sell less. Even though the media might tell us otherwise, LGBTQ, at least from a mailing list perspective, doesn't sell as much as some of these others. And and I think this children's thing is like the chapter books, the hard, the smaller books. And evidently now Harry Potter is actually considered teen, so it's up here somewhere. But so this gives you an idea, just kind of raw genre breakdown of what seems to be popular in that set of readers, which is a large set of readers. Yes. Yeah, this is specifically for BookBub, but they're large enough. I mean, they've got like a mailing list of like 8 million people, so it's on the average going to be a reasonable representation of readership. Now, admittedly, their demographic, is people who are looking for a low price. So, does that change this message? It maybe does for people who only buy like hot off the press latest stuff and are willing to spend more. They could, this may turn upside down, but this is just a view into just raw data from one particular source. And that's not to say that, any of the categories on the bottom are things that you shouldn't write. I mean, we've got people who are making a killing on dino porn. I mean, it's, who am I to judge? So, whatever, So see, inevitably, once you start writing and you have a couple books, you're going to end up realizing, I've got some things that sell better than others. And you have to kind of analyze why. Is it the genre? I don't know. Is it because I have skill in that particular thing that I write? Like, so my background is heavy in the sciences. So I can tell you for a fact that almost all my thrillers have threads of science. They're techno-thrillers. So everything that I write that has a heavy technology basis sells better than, let's say some of the stuff that is less technical. Is that a reading on the genre or the reading on my skill level? It's hard to tell. But, I just happen to be an expert in a lot of the stuff, and I know how to write that well, clearly, because it sells well. And so this is an analysis that you have to do of your own work to figure out, what should I do? Which should be my focus? And let's get to the crazy part. So, the people who are making high 6 figures, 7 figures a year, this is obviously, the Brandon Sanderson type, not to use anybody who's currently here. So, so inevitably, these people aren't just working hard. They're working hard and smart. They're efficient. And you will notice that they work with teams. Not necessarily on the writing, but there's people backing them up for this stuff. We'll talk about it a little bit here. You inevitably are going to work with marketing teams. Now, what's funny is when I first wrote these foils, I was working with a marketing team. I fired them. So since then, and the reality is that like I said, all of the most successful authors have marketing budget that they use. Now, whether you have other people do the marketing for you or you do it yourself really depends on your skill set and interest. I used to work at a three-letter company on the East Coast and reverse engineered things, and I have a lot of skills in figuring out how things work. And so I realized that the marketing team wasn't doing nearly as good of a job as I could do, so I took over. But when you're working with a marketing, most people aren't me, a different skill set. So I've just got this weird skill set. But you want to maximize the ROI on your marketing spend, and when you're spending possibly tens of thousands of dollars, or even maybe over $100,000 in a year, you don't want to be burning that money up in flames. So you want to be focused. And just to give you an idea of how crazy you can get, and I'm gonna fly through some of these slides. You're not gonna be able to see this, but basically what I'm showing here, this is for the offline review. Some of these marketing teams were making bid changes. So an ad is I want to bid for a click. You're trying to get people to click on your ad. And they were adjusting the bid counts based on the time every 2 hours. And imagine you have 20 books in 5 different stores across the world. You've got, and each book maybe has several campaigns. You're talking about hundreds of campaigns being changed every 2 hours. You can go nuts. I don't do that. But they were trying to optimize. It didn't work. But I'm hoping at some point in time that it does. But yeah. And again, this is just more of the same. Amazon and most of the ad campaign systems have pretty good tracking. So this is how you can figure out how is your spend, click-through rates, all these things. What's working, what's not working. So this is where you're probably going to be working with some marketing professionals of some kind or another. Inevitable, you're going to take advantage of, again, these are kind of the high earners. So you've written a book, and what's the easiest way to go ahead and sell more of that book? Put it in a different format. So audio. A lot of people listen to books on audio. So we'll work potentially either with audio companies or audio narrators directly. I personally work with narrators directly myself. It's a time versus money thing. Working through a audio company, you'll get 1/3 of the money back that you would if you were doing it working deals yourself. So I like the money part. So I exchange my time for money. I don't know what that says about me, but whatever. The same thing could be said about translations. So I've written a book. I've written 20 books. Which would take less time? Writing another 20 books, or getting it translated into 3 different languages. That's 60 more books that I can sell in different parts of the world. So again, you will work with those people. Foreign publishers. Sometimes, to me, the litmus test was always, if I'm going to work with a foreign publisher, it means that it's hard for me to get to the reader. And some places that would be true. Because maybe Amazon isn't big in their country. So I would, go ahead and work through a foreign publisher. And then, some people actually publish others. So, which is just a rinse and repeat of what you do for yourself, you're doing it for others. But there's a lot more contractual obligations and complications that you have to just make sure of as a business owner. And I'll give you an example of, it's kind of a week in the life, but the commonality across all of these things, which I'll flip through quickly, is, for each of these, I'm always on social media, just checking, making, dad jokes, getting myself in jail, whatever. checking the marketing, checking the earnings, and looking for anything that needs attention, fighting any fires that happen, and then just writing, because inevitably we're authors, so that the key thing is every day, write. So day one, I'll give you an example, and I'm just going to gloss over it. Social media. So when I decided to go do this, I just took random, June 30th. I was like, all right, I write down what I was doing that was author related. And I'll leave the details for later, but working with the artist, working with a narration company in Germany, doing the marketing, receiving the French translation, integrating it into Amazon's system. I've got some deals with traditional publishers, so yelling at the Simon & Schuster people. A lot of miscellaneous stuff, more writing. Day two was social media, talking with my web designer. I was in the middle of a web refactoring. And marketing, translation, more miscellaneous, and it goes on, paying people, paying the artist, paying the translator, more of the same, more of the same, more of the same, and more of the same. So, and we're almost at the end of the foils, but the thing I get from a lot of people is, I don't have time for all that. You're doing this, great. That's your full-time job. I'll give you a hint. I haven't retired from job one yet. This is what I do. So, the I can't find time for this is really, you choose not to find time for this. There's always things you can do from a prioritization standpoint. I've got kids, I've got a wife, I've got family, I've got work, job one work. This is job two, believe it or not. Now, will I retire soon? Yeah, well, maybe. But, from job one, but I could if I wanted to. Haven't yet. But inevitably, you have to find your happy place with your goals, figure out where you want to be, because they are your goals. And ask me anything, because and I'd ask everybody to go to the microphone so the folks who are getting it online can actually hear it. We have about 3.5 minutes for questions. I ran over.
Hi. I put a comment on Facebook once about I got a full-time job. I'm excited about it as an engineer racing. And you made a comment, and it was like, I resemble this more than you'll ever know. You probably don't remember, but I'm intrigued about your full-time job and your balance and how long it took you to do the 20 books writing.
So how long it took me to do the 20 books? So the 20 books is probably over the span, certainly over 5, 6 years, 7 years. But it's amazing what you can do if you dedicate daily, the 2 hours before, you wake up early, you dedicate the 2 hours, and you get stuff done, and then the next day, you edit the previous day's work, and you put in another 2 hours, and if you do that day in, day out, it's amazing what you can actually get.
And you're doing that now as well?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Hi, I have 3 quick questions.
Sure.
The first one is really one, but it looks like 3. How expensive is a translator? I just am curious. And then if you have to choose an investment, which is better, a translator or an audiobook?
So, all right, so to answer the first question, translator can vary, but you definitely want to have a quality translator, and a quality translator is going to be in the thousands. So, depending on the length of the book. So, for a typical one of my books, $5,000. Wow. So, now I do have a tripub, a person who, like, my German translator also does stuff for like Larry Correa and some other authors. So, can it be gotten cheaper? Yes, probably. There's always a question of quality and a concern. And if you're not the native reader, there's a lot of trust. So that's.
So if you had to invest in one or the other.
Oh, and if I had to invest in one or the other, I would say, especially when you're starting off, and this is what I did, work through a audio publisher as much as possible, because then it doesn't cost you anything and they take care of all of it. So at first, let them do it, and then eventually you migrate.
Okay. And then my last question was, I saw you had done Facebook ads, and you said you were reverse engineering, so that the question might be mute, but how did you learn Facebook ads? Like, did you have a system or a person you went to learn these? Because
So the Facebook ad, the documentation on Facebook is actually pretty good, and there's a lot of reasonable documentation on how to do it. And there's actually there's sessions even today that I would point you to. A lot of the reverse engineering I did had to do with the Amazon stuff, and so I've got a session on Thursday, I think, where actually tomorrow, where I cover the dark secrets. I think we have probably room for one more question.
thank you very much.
What is the number of units that you're identifying as the takeoff point when you go from print and ebook to audiobook?
That's a good question. I don't know that. So I don't, because that really reads into profitability. When is it profitable to invest in audio, as an example? And I look at this way. If you do a good job, you look at this as an investment that pays off in the long run. Because if you spend more than you're making right now on an audio, and you look at it as an investment, you can go ahead and get money back. It might take you a year to earn your money back, but everything afterwards is gravy. So you have to have a different mindset. And I think we're out of time. So thank you.
Sharon and Dave, they're texting. They're like, aren't you done? It's 12 o'clock. We're here. We're ready to eat. So do you want to eat at the burger place? Like we did yesterday?